you have the greatest celebration and the greatest criminal controversy all happening at the exact same time in the exact same place. And in the middle of this celebration, Jesus shows up. And this causes Nicodemus, our old friend, to come out of the shadows and for the first time defend Jesus in the light of day. There was once a famous historian who said that if you had not experienced the Festival of Shelters or Festival of Booths, that you had not experienced true joy. Now that's a big statement. If you enjoy Bible studies like this, I hope that you'll subscribe to my channel and continue going through the book of John with me. So the Festival of Shelters or Festival of Booths or Tabernacles, it has lots of names, was first commanded by God in the Old Testament to the Israelites. The purpose was so that they would always remember the wandering of their ancestors, the lack of provision, the lack of a home and safety and farmland, but that through all of that, that God always provided for them. So every year, the Jewish people would leave their normal homes, their normal jobs, their lives, and they would go and create these little structures that they would live in, these temporary tents. And so now we are fast forwarded many years, and now it is a pilgrimage that they make to Jerusalem, where they construct these all over the hillsides and through the town, on rooftops. And it would be a huge celebration. It would be something that the children would look forward to. There was a lot of music and food and celebration. And it was all building to this crescendo at the end where they would have the last day of the celebration. But first, let's back up a little bit because I want to set the stage of where we're at here at the beginning of chapter 7. Because if you remember at the end of chapter 6, Jesus has returned to Galilee. And so when we start chapter 7, it says in verse 1, after this, Jesus traveled around Galilee. He wanted to stay out of Judea, where the Jewish leaders were plotting his death. We know because of the timeline of what Jesus had just been doing and what ceremonies had just happened, and that they were at the end of the harvest season. And now here we are at the Festival of Booths. It's about a 6-month period where Jesus had been spending his time in Galilee and in this area, essentially in hiding, knowing that it wasn't his time yet. Verse 2 says, "But soon it was time for the Jewish Festival of Shelters, and Jesus' brothers said to him, 'Leave here, go to Judea, where your followers can see your miracles. You can't become famous if you hide like this. If you can do such wonderful things, show yourself to the world,' for even his brothers didn't believe in him." But after his brothers left for the festival, Jesus also went, though secretly, staying out of public view. The Jewish leaders tried to find him at the festival and kept asking if anyone had seen him. Verse 14, then midway through the festival, Jesus went up to the temple and he began to teach. The people were surprised when they heard him. How does he know so much when he hasn't been trained? So now we're at verse 21, and Jesus is calling back to when he performed that miracle on the Sabbath day. And he is telling them that you condemn me for doing this miracle, and yet you do things on the Sabbath like circumcision. So let's skip down to verse 24. It says, look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly. Some of the people who lived in Jerusalem started to ask each other, isn't this the man they are trying to kill? But here he is, speaking in public, and they say nothing to him. Could our leaders possibly believe that he is the Messiah? But how could he be? For we know where this man comes from. When the Messiah comes, he will simply appear. No one will know where he comes from. And this is something that they had just started believing, that the Messiah would just appear out of nowhere, but it was believed widely. And so when they say this, well, won't he just appear? Many people believed that, and it was likely being taught. Okay, so that kind of sets the scene. There's a lot of turmoil going on. This is a 7-day celebration. So sometimes when we hear something like this about this festival where they're living outdoors and they're living in these tent-like shelters, we might think, well, like, what's the big deal? Because it's so long ago, and because of movies and stories, we think they were already living in this way, that they weren't really well established. But the truth is, many of these people had homes, they had doors, they had windows and furniture, they had jobs. And so this was a big deal. They did make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to have this special time where they celebrated what God had done for their ancestors. And so, what greater time than this for Jesus to show up and make such a big proclamation? So, over time, traditions grew around this festival. One of the most important was this daily water ceremony. So, each morning, a priest would lead a procession down to the pool of Siloam. He would fill a golden pitcher. And while he was doing this, they would be playing all kinds of music and singing the words of Isaiah, "With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation." So the people would follow the priest down to get this water from the pool. They would take it up to the temple and they would pour it out over these rocks. And this was a way to commemorate, to remember, to celebrate the water that came from the rock with Moses. So they did this every single day for all 7 days. On the last day, it was the biggest procession. All the people came. Many priests were there. It was a reflection of Jericho. And so it was a huge celebration. So they would get the water, they would go up the hill to the altar, and they would go around the altar 7 times, and then they would pour the water out over the rocks, and they would sing these songs from Isaiah. So it's the last day. It's this enormous celebration. People have probably packed things up, and some of them are ready to go. The priests are circling the altar 7 times, and the crowd is shouting with celebration and singing. And now we don't know if this is the moment that Jesus chooses to stand up and reveal himself. John doesn't tell us that. But Jesus has a way of making the most of these moments. And so it is likely, but we don't know, that this is when Jesus stood up and he said, verse 37, partway through, you see Jesus is speaking, and it says, "Anyone who is thirsty may come to me. Anyone who believes in me may come and drink. For the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from his heart." And then 39 says, "When he said living water, he was speaking of the Spirit, who would be given to everyone believing in him. But the Spirit had not yet been given, because Jesus had not yet entered into his glory." And so suddenly the entire festival is pointing at Jesus. This is the moment. It says in verse 40, when the crowds heard him say this, some of them declared, "Surely this man is the prophet we've been expecting." Others said, "He is the Messiah." Still others said, "But he can't be. Will the Messiah come from Galilee?" Verse 42, "For the scriptures clearly state that the Messiah will be born of the royal line of David in Bethlehem, the village where King David was born." So this is another fulfillment. They don't know this yet. Verse 43, "So the crowd was divided about him. Some even wanted him arrested, but no one laid a hand on him." Verse 45, when the temple guards returned without having arrested Jesus, the leading priests and Pharisees demanded, "Why didn't you bring him in?" Verse 46, "We have never heard anyone speak like this," the guards responded. You can imagine the Pharisees who had sent these guards out are furious. Verse 47, "Have you been led astray too?" the Pharisees mocked. "Is there a single one of us rulers or Pharisees who believes in him?" Verse 49, "This foolish crowd follows him, but they are ignorant of the law. God's curse is on them." And then this is the moment when Nicodemus speaks up and he breaks from his fellow Pharisees. And in verse 51, he says, "Is it legal to convict a man before he is given a hearing?" Verse 52, they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search the scriptures and see for yourself. No prophet ever comes from Galilee." Something that's interesting about chapter 7 is that people aren't doing anything wrong. They're obeying the commands of Scripture. They're doing what God has asked them. They're reenacting the story of the Exodus the way that God commanded them to do in the Old Testament Scriptures. And yet, the very thing that they're celebrating, the whole point of the ceremony, is standing right in front of them. They don't see what is right there before them because they're focused on the ritual. Maybe that's because they've been doing it for so long. Jesus doesn't condemn the festival, he fulfills the festival by his arriving there and speaking. He gently invites people who are thirsty to come to him. And this invitation confuses people, inspires people, makes some people afraid. It's just like today. Jesus shows up in unexpected ways, in unexpected places. We just have to be aware and alert and ready. And that is chapter 7. We have echoes of the Israelites in the wilderness. We have the echoes of Jericho and the water ceremonies. We have living water being drawn up from the pool, brought up to the temple by the high priest to be poured over the altar as a blessing and as a prayer for living water. And we have Jesus in the middle of all of it, who proclaims himself as the living water. This chapter will lead into the next celebration where Jesus declares himself as the light of the world at a festival of lights. It's so amazing, and I'm really excited about chapter 8. It might be my most favorite chapter in the book of John. So that is all for today. That is chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon.